Okay, picture this. A brand new self-driving car has just driven millions of miles. It seems totally ready, but how do we actually know it's safe enough for you and me to share the road with? That final judgment call, well, it's like a high-stakes trial, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. I mean, this is the question, right? After all the designing, all the coding, all the testing, somebody has to make the final call. Is this thing safe enough to be out there with our families? And as you're about to see, the process for answering that is incredibly rigorous. It requires building a case for safety that's practically airtight. Now, before we get into the trial, we need to be really clear on what kind of safety we're talking about. We're not talking about a piece of hardware breaking, like a brake wire snapping. That's covered by a standard called ISO 26262. We're focused on something way trickier, known as SOTIF. This deals with safety when everything is working perfectly, but the system just gets confused. Think about a camera getting completely blinded by sun glare. Nothing's broken, but it's still a huge problem. That's the challenge here. So, just like any trial, the very first step is to gather all the evidence. But here's the thing. This isn't about running a bunch of new tests at the last minute. Nope. It's about collecting and organizing every single piece of analysis, every bit of data that was created during the car's entire development. All that evidence gets sorted into 4 main case files, if you will. First, what was the car even designed to do? And what's our definition of safe enough? Second, where do we already know its weak spots are? Third, what do all the test results actually tell us? And finally, what's the game plan for any risks that are still left over even after launch? Let's break those down. The first file really just lays the groundwork. It defines the car's operating design domain, or ODD, which is basically the official rulebook for when and where the car's supposed to work, like, say, only on highways during the daytime. It also lists every potential hazard you can think of and, this is critical, it defines the safe enough baseline. That's the yardstick everything else is going to be measured against. Okay, this file gets right to the heart of SOTIF, because this is where the engineers have to be brutally honest about the system's known weaknesses. They have to identify all the triggering conditions, things like sudden heavy rain or that blinding sun glare we talked about, that could cause a problem. And then they have to show exactly what they did in the design to try and handle those risks. And here's the hard data, all the results from verification and validation. This isn't just a simple checklist of tests for dangers we already know about. The strategy has to show how the engineers went hunting for the unknown dangers, those infamous unknown unknowns. They have to prove that the risk from those is super low. This is where thousands of hours of simulations and real-world driving footage provide the actual proof. Look, no system is ever going to be 100% perfect, and this last evidence file acknowledges that. It takes a hard look at any leftover risk, what they call residual risk, and answers the big question, is what's left over acceptable? It also has to include a plan for monitoring the cars out in the real world after they've been sold, just in case any new safety issues pop up. All right, all the evidence has been submitted. The case files are stacked high. Now, the assessor, who is basically our judge, steps in. And they don't just thumb through the pages. They have 3 very specific jobs, 3 mandates they have to fulfill to make sure this whole process is legit. The very first mandate is to review the evidence for quality. Is it all there? Did the team actually analyze everything they were supposed to? Is the data correct? Does it actually reflect reality? And is it consistent? Do all these different documents actually tell the same story, or do they contradict each other? Second, and this is huge, the assessor has to find a logical argument. 1,000 pages of test results are pretty much useless on their own. It's just a data dump. The car maker has to build a compelling case that shows exactly how all that evidence proves the car is safe. It's about connecting the dots and explaining the why, not just showing the what. And finally, after checking all the evidence and hearing the whole argument, the judge makes a recommendation. This is the whole point of the process, right? To get a formal, expert judgment on whether this vehicle is truly safe enough to be released to the public. So to recap, it's pretty straightforward. Review the evidence, verify the logical argument, and make a final recommendation. RAR. This 3-step process is what makes sure the final decision is built on a rock-solid foundation. Now, let's see how this all comes together. All of this work, every document, every test, it all leads to one single master document, the SOTIF release argument. You should really think of this as the grand closing argument in our trial, where every piece of evidence is woven together into one, hopefully persuasive story. And this quote nails it. The final output can't just be a pile of reports. It has to be a story that makes sense. It's the step-by-step logical explanation of why we should trust this incredibly complex machine on our roads. So, how do you make a logical story that's easy for someone to check? Well, engineers often use this really cool method called goal structuring notation, or GSN. Honestly, it's basically a flowchart for an argument. It lets you visually map your main safety claim all the way down to every single little piece of evidence that supports it. Let me just show you how it works. It's pretty neat. So you start at the very top with a big specific goal or a claim, something like this. The car's automatic emergency braking system works safely in heavy fog. See? Nice and clear. Okay, that's a bold claim. So the next step is to lay out your strategy. How are you going to prove it? In this case, the strategy is to show you've covered all your bases by combining 3 different kinds of data: stuff from simulations, tests on a closed track, and data from driving in the real world. And then, at the very bottom, you provide the links to the actual evidence, the concrete stuff, the simulation reports, the track results, the documents that detail the sensor's limitations. Each one of these is a building block that holds up the whole argument. With a map like this, the judge can easily follow your logic and spot any weak links. So the case has been presented, the evidence has been reviewed, the closing argument has been made. The time has finally come for the final verdict. And there are 3 possible recommendations the assessor can make. The outcomes are pretty intuitive: full acceptance, a flat-out rejection, or something right in the middle called conditional acceptance. And honestly, in the real world of developing this crazy complex tech, that conditional verdict is often the most common and practical way to go. See, conditional acceptance is this smart way of balancing safety and progress. It means, okay, you can release the car, but with these specific rules. For instance, maybe a car gets the green light, but its special snow mode is turned off until it passes more tests. Or maybe it can be released while the last little bit of a super long durability test is still running. It's a pragmatic solution for a technology that's constantly evolving. If you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this quote, because it sums up the entire philosophy. Having a clean test record is not enough. True safety comes from building such a strong, logical argument that you can confidently explain why a failure is not just unlikely, but logically impossible, as long as the car stays within its defined rules. This whole process, this trial, it's designed to be tough, transparent, and based on pure logic. It's an attempt to replace that feeling of uncertainty with a structured, provable case for safety. So the real question is for you. Now that you've seen how the trial works, would you trust the verdict? Does it give you more confidence in the next self-driving car you see on the road?